Hey everybody, it's Murgle, and today we'll be talking about the good old topic of Burning Crusade. Now, as I said, I wanted to do one for every expansion, a best and worst compilation, and everybody loved the vanilla one, so we're moving on to the Burning Crusade one. And as I did before, I'm going to keep my opinion out as much as possible, so it's unbiased. This is just what I've gathered from community forums and Reddit and things like that, talking about WoW. So, let's just jump right into it. Burning Crusade is one of the most highly regarded of the expansions. There are many people who would probably refer to it as their favorite. And I personally would admit that I have some awesome memories from Outland. But what exactly gave it such charm? Like, what was so great about this desolate world that was destroyed by the Legion? And I would just say one of the things that captures you first about Outlands is the scenery, the sheer development that was put into making this a fascinating fantasy world. Outland had a beautiful scenery. Things would catch you. It really engulfed the presence of a shattered world. And Nagrin was the beautiful landscape that was mostly untouched, and everything about it just caught your eye. Going to Blade's Edge Mountain, where the Gron, which were like dragon slayers, you could see dragons impaled on the spikes throughout Blade's Edge Mountain, would really just catch you. It was just all these details that, the developers put into making this scenery really awe-inspiring. And it definitely did do its job. A lot of people would say they thought it was really, truly amazing. That's the only way you can put it. Another great thing, highly welcome from the community, were the raiding and dungeon aspects that appeared. Heroic dungeons were accepted pretty much immediately, because not only did they offer a respectable loot, heroic dungeons at the time were semi-challenging. It was actually, difficult 5-man content. And even those who couldn't dedicate a serious raiding time schedule to get into the raiding scene could do heroic content for, a semi-decent challenge. It really was. It was semi-challenging. And, you had to CC, you had to do everything that you would do in a raid normally. And it was a lot of fun. Heroic dungeons were really well accepted by the community, and they also changed the raiding scene quite a bit throughout BC. It was the change from 20 to 40 man raiding down to 10 and 25 man raiding, and while I thought personally that 20 and 40 man raiding was an epic experience, it really was, because that's a raid. It was epic. There were a lot of people and it was chaotic a lot of times, but the sheer amount of people that were in those raids would cause massive amounts of lags with all the animations, just everything happening. Nowadays, I think computers could handle 20 to 40 man raiding quite easily, but 10 to 25 man raiding allowed for a more balanced group setup, and just overall better loot distribution, because not many pieces were dropping in 20 to 40 man raids for the amount of your group. So the shrunken raid size helped quite a bit, and was, overall welcomed by the community. Also in the raiding scene, Karazhan, the early raid from the expansion, but probably if you'd ask most people playing during BC, they would say it's their most memorable. And it was because it's just Karazhan was, the early raid, but it was such a very immersive raid. It held a lot of lore. It was beautifully designed. The halls were mysterious and wondrous. You had heard the name Medivh before, but now you got to stroll the halls of his once great home. The bosses and events throughout were, very fun and enticing. It was a really good raid, and I bet if you would ask a lot of the community, they might still regard Karazhan as their favorite raid to date, having done it or participated in it. It was just well-designed raid. It was fun even from a casual aspect. It was challenging, but many of the players still got to see the raid. Overall, well done. Another favorite is flying mounts, and I know what you're thinking. Flying mounts as a best thing, what kind of blasphemy is this? In which I would agree to that now. I would definitely agree. But at the time, if you go from the Burning Crusade aspect, flying mounts were actually extremely accepted. In Burning Crusade, it worked really well. The landscape seemed fitting, it was a harsh world, and you needed this heroic creature to burden you through it. On top of that, there was a huge distinction between normal flying and epic flying. Normal flying mounts were 60% speed, so they were slower than a ground epic mount at the time. It actually flew at a slower rate than you would if you just ran on the ground. And on top of that, you weren't getting anywhere very fast. You were just flying above really high so the monsters couldn't reach you. And this allowed you to observe the amazing landscape from all angles. They put in specific content just for flying people. Like, you had to be able to have a flying mount to reach certain places, just to farm certain monsters, things like that. There was content around flying. Not necessarily just the landscape itself was crappy, so you wish you could fly over it. I'm looking at you, High Mountain. But there was actually content that involved flying, which gave it a more immersive feeling. So, if you look at it like this, and you hate flying now, for instance, then did you hate it during the Burning Crusade? Or do you just hate it now because of how it is? And finally, the last great thing about this expac, of course there could be many more, but based on what people said, it was the lore. The reintroduction of characters that were well known in the Warcraft universe, the Draenei and Blood Elves coming into the game, which allowed for the Alliance to finally have shamans, and for the Horde to finally have paladins. Caverns of Time was also an amazing addition to the game, because Caverns of Time let you experience events in the Warcraft history that shaped the story itself. You could go see the opening of the Dark Portal, which ushered the Horde into the Azeroth. Azeroth was then ravaged by these Horde, and you had to protect Medivh during the event because they're trying to alter history. It was a great way to let players know the lore through fun and enticing gameplay. And just in many, many ways, it gave players unforgettable experiences. Very well designed. Now, on to the worst things about Burning Crusade. And as for finding worst about this expac, I'll admit, it was harder to find people complaining about this one than even vanilla. There were plenty of people that wanted to bash on vanilla, but it was actually kind of hard to find people bashing on Burning Crusade. There was quite a good, I guess, harmony in a way, but every expansion has its flaws, no matter how good it is. And nothing is perfect. So I'll name a couple of the few bad things I could find. BC offered PvP. Now, there's obviously PvP before, but Burning Crusade introduced the arena, which isn't bad at all. Arena is actually a really cool thing. It finally allowed players to show off their skills in head-to-head combat. It was a great way, and obviously we have arena tournaments now and everything, so really, really cool, right? But now, when you're talking about Burning Crusade, PvP was still quite unbalanced. So during the Burning Crusade era, when we had very, very bad PvP balance, we now had arenas which were supposed to show your skill, which in a lot of cases they would, but the tanks of this expansion were healers when it came to PvP. A skilled healer in PvP was almost near unkillable with a high amount of resilience. Resilience was, at the time, very poorly weighted, I guess is the way to put it. There wasn't really a diminishing return on it, so the more resilience you got, the more invincible you almost became. And when we're talking about healers, I have memories of like disciplined priests running across the field with like the entire team trying to attack one little disciplined priest running across the field, and they just wouldn't die. Or the same with like Resto Druid, Paladin. Really, a lot of the healers were just on top when it came to stacking resilience, making it very unbalanced in the game. And that's really it. Like, Arena was a great addition, but the fact that the game was so poorly balanced still at the time kind of made it a bad time to implement it too. And then another bad thing about the game was the devaluing of epics. This really started in Burning Crusade. It's carried on since then, but this was the beginning of it, and epics would start becoming not so epic. And it's not to say that their stats were poor or they were crappy. It's just in vanilla, when you would see somebody wearing like 4 epics, you thought, wow, that player is really, really good. They got 4 epics. And epics were either extremely expensive, so they took a long time to get, or you had to do a lot of runs or like all kinds of crazy stuff to get epic gear of some type. So epics were epic, if that makes any sense. And Burning Crusade begins the journey of making epics obtainable through easier means, rather, like you could buy them with the badges you would receive. And again, this didn't mean they were bad or their stats were garbage or anything like that. It just took away the wonder of the gear. Even if it was just a change of color, you went from wearing blue gear to purple gear, it just gave the feel a little less love, if that makes any sense. So, the epic feel was kind of diminished in this expansion. Another poor design is the dead classes, or rather dead specializations again. In Burning Crusade, it was definitely a positive step in the right direction. I actually started seeing classes playing specs that I had almost never seen in vanilla. However, they were still far and few between. So, you were looking at, many of the classes from before, like paladins, shamans, druids. They were healing a lot, but priests in this expac did shine quite a bit as Shadow. I believe Shadow was quite good during this expansion. And druids did see a lot more tanking. Paladins as well. I saw tanking paladins quite a bit. I think they were the best when it came to AoE tanking during this time. So, warriors weren't just tanking this expansion. They actually got to experience DPSing quite frequently. Overall, it was definitely heading toward the point where class could play any of their specs, but still many of them just weren't viable in a lot of the cases. That being said, even the dead specs were still somewhat required for raiding. Despite not being all that good during BC, rep paladins were invited. Like, I think, you wanted at least one rep paladin in your raid because the aura they provided, as well as it just gave more paladin boosts, so you could get more blessings to your raid. And it was the small things like that gave each spec an identity, but still the lack of power from certain ones kept them locked out of a lot of content. Walls this expansion. It had a lot of them. You had to clear old raids just to do newer raids, meaning if you weren't there in the beginning of the expansion already progressing with your guild throughout, then you were way behind. Attunements were spread throughout, and it did gate a lot of content behind re-clearing previous raids, which meant new recruits would require you to run old content that your guild might have already, passed, and they were trying to be done with it. So it meant that no content was really old content. You were going to have to run it again, probably for some reason or another. This gave raiding a very straight and narrow path. So you basically had to follow it even if the expansion was already closing in on the end. This type of flat linear gameplay was also prominent in Burning Crusade leveling scene. When you hit a certain level, you basically headed to a specific zone. And I know you'll all remember dinging level 64 and then going to Nagran. And don't tell me you don't remember getting level 65 and then spamming in general chat looking for a group to complete Ring of Blood because you wanted those juicy weapons, as did everyone else. Then when you went on alt, you did the exact same thing. So it was a very linear gameplay style throughout Burning Crusade. You didn't really have a lot of variation in many of the aspects. And finally, the last thing on our list of worst is the lore, which might sound funny because I included it in the best things for the expansion. But let's face it, the lore was also one of the worst things about Burning Crusade. While it was really cool that they reintroduced characters and people that have been missed sorely in the Warcraft lore, their reintroduction didn't make a lot of sense, and some of the twists to beloved characters was also quite strange. Like, it was just, what? Why are they doing this? The Illidan arc was kind of confusing, especially in the BC lore of how it came out. It was so confusing that they easily retconned the lore just a little bit. So now that Illidan was a hero, and we were the bad guys for beating him up during the era of Burning Crusade. That's how wacky the lore was. It was very easy for them to fix it, to make Illidan a hero during Burning Crusade rather than a villain, and now we were bad for beating him up. And of course you wouldn't have known that at the time, because it wasn't until now in Legion that we discovered these things, but still, the only reason it was so easy is because of how wacky the story was during Burning Crusade. So, that's why lore was one of the poor things. It just didn't make a lot of sense for most of the expansion. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this installment, and that's a wrap for it. Of course, many of the things I said, you could have completely disagreed with my opinion, which is completely fine, as even my opinion differs from the things I stated. So just remember that this is what I gathered from searching forums and posts, and just got a consensus of opinions to see what everybody thought. I really enjoy making these, so I hope you enjoy watching them. Let me know what you think down below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all again real soon. Bye-bye.